this morning. And then it was just reports.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. That's the only time I've ever got to use that. I'd like to call, I am calling this meeting of the public session, June 19th, 2019, to order. And I would ask you to rise and join with me in singing the national anthem.
Oh, Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love, in all of us command. Quand on bras s'est porté l'épée, il s'est porté la croix. Ton histoire est d'une épopée, des plus brillants exploits. God keep our land glorious and free. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for
Director, I would ask you to take roll call, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, trustees. This is our roll call for our regular board meeting of 19 June 2019. Trustee Barry.
Present.
Trustee Cram.
Present.
Trustee Danaher.
Present.
Trustee Jacobs.
Present.
Vice Chair McPherson.
Present.
Chair McAllister.
Present.
Trustee McCray.
Present.
Trustee McDonald.
Present.
Trustee Parisian.
Present.
Trustee Schooler.
Present.
Trustee Swan.
Present.
Student Trustee Bush-Ricadra.
Present.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You have quorum.
Thank you, Director. I need a mover and a seconder for the consent agenda, please. Moved by Trustee Barry, seconded by Trustee Danaher, that the Upper Canada District School Board approve consent agenda items 5.02 to 5.04, June 9, 2019, as submitted. Please cast your vote online. I don't have it, Lisa. I don't have it. Does everybody else have it? I'm voting in favor. Thank you. This motion passes. 601, are there any conflict of interest declarations?
I'd like to declare one under, I think it is, I'm sorry, I'm just going to get the number, 1502.
Thank you, so noted. 701, I have a motion that we move into private session. Could we have a mover, please? Trustee Schooler, and seconded by Trustee Danaher, that the Upper Canada District School Board move into Committee of the Whole June 19th, 2019 at 6:35. Please cast your ballot, please. Go ahead and come back in, Lisa. That motion carries. I have a second motion moved by Trustee Parisian and Trustee Jacobs, that the Committee of the Whole move into private session number 1, June 19, 2019. Please cast your ballots. That motion passes. 8-0. We're now into private session, and I will turn the chair over to the chair, and I will try and Yes, I did.
American Institute.
Okay. No, not yet. Yeah.
Is that motion?
8:01.
Right there. Yeah, I got it.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are now back in public session. I need a motion that the Upper Canada District School Board move back to the regular board meeting June 19th at 7:30 p.m. Moved by trustee Schooler and trustee Barry, seconder. Cast your vote, please.
In favor.
That motion carries. We are now going to 9:01, and it's an honor and a privilege to pay special recognition to one of our employees. So, Director, I will turn this over to you.
Sure. Mr. Chair, I wonder if you'd join me at the podium over there, please, for a moment. Appreciative that the board has taken time on their agenda this evening to recognize Superintendent Phil Dawes. So Mr. Dawes has been in the public education sector for 31 years, the last 18 with the Upper Canada District School Board, and the last 5 as a superintendent of district alignment and as a member of the senior staff. The board has come to rely on Mr. Dawes' expertise as it relates to a number of different things. Certainly our annual enrollment projections is one example of what he leads his department through, but also some very complex task program reviews, accommodation reviews, of which during his career with the Upper Canada District School Board, he's been asked to conduct 2 in the last 10 years. As well, we know that Mr. Dawes has been front and center in supporting research that affects how we approach our work in schools and in staff development. He's a key part of the Managing Information for Student Achievement, or MISA movement, that's been part of the Ministry of Education for the past decade and has presented to the Ministry of Education some really interesting things. One element that I was present for was about a focus on full-day kindergarten and its proposed effects on student learning and student achievement. So we're going to really miss Superintendent Dawes, his intellect and his energy and his focus that he brings to the department. But it's our pleasure to honor him in 2 ways. One, in terms of a gift that the board has to present on behalf of the chair. And I'll just stop here to see if the chair wishes to bring any comments forward.
It's well recognized that I am not a numbers person, so it's really good to know that we do have somebody on staff who is. Phil, we're going to miss you very much, and we thank you for your contributions over the past number of years. And I must say one thing in particular, the community planning partnership meeting was held last week. You did a fine job. So please come forward.
As well, Mr. Chair, the members of the board will know that supervisory officers wear 2 hats. They're agents of the Crown, and because of that, they're asked under the Education Act to fulfill a number of duties on behalf of the Minister of Education, and as well, they're employees of the board. So it's my pleasure to present to Superintendent Dawes a certificate of appreciation that recognizes his accomplishments from the province of Ontario and the Minister of Education. So congratulations.
Thank you, Director and Chair. You know, it is a bit strange to come down this path, and the truth is I've never retired before, so it feels a bit weird. And one of the things I'm finding is that when you announce your retirement, people tend to ask you, how do you feel? And that's a very difficult question to answer because it's so multi-layered. But I have been thinking recently about how I could try and sum this up with one word, and I've come up with the word gratitude. You know, in education, we really need to work together. And I've found over my 31 years and 18 with this board, I've been so fortunate to be able to work with some very, very wonderful people. And if you'll grant me a few minutes, I need to walk you through a few names, if that's okay. And I do want to start with my small but vibrant district alignment team. This group of people does so much work, so much quality work, and it's just been a pleasure to work with them over the years. I'm referring to Sarah Crawford, Patty White, April Scott Clark, Karen Thompson, Suzanne Falero, Derek Castleman, Mark Calder, and Jody. Thank you so much for everything that you've done with me over the years. It's just been wonderful. And I do want to give a special recognition to my assistant, Joanne Goodmanson. One of Joanne's redeeming qualities is that she's a very patient person. And I think she's needed that patience working with me over the years, so I really appreciate that. I also want to take an opportunity, if I could briefly, to mention some key people at head office staff that I've had the opportunity of working with over the years. These are people that aren't often recognized, I don't think, to the extent that they could or should be. I'm referring to people in our facilities department like Peter Bosch, our IT department, Jim Guerin, Julie Robertson, Steve McKenzie, our ONSYS team, Matt Raby in international education, Brad Notman in purchasing, Diana Kingston and Michael, thank you so much for the work over the years. Wendy Lamke and Jen McDonald in HR, and Judy Kaiser. Thank you all so much. A special thanks, if I could, to Patricia Sutherland, who really helped me out over the years in the MISA front that Stephen mentioned, and Lisa Workman. Thank you so much for everything that you've done for me over the years. It's been special. Allison Inglis and David Armstrong, our two chief psychologists, have worked with me over the years on our external research committee, and I really appreciate their help as well. A quick thanks, if I could, to our principals and VPs in the system. They have been an incredible source of inspiration to me over the years, and they're just wonderful people. And you know that already, but over the years I've just found that's been an incredible wealth of information to go to, and I appreciated their support. Director Sliwa and the senior team, what can I say? You're a class amongst yourselves. And really, the skill that you bring to everything that you do is just inspiring, and I just appreciate so much that everything you've shared with me over the years. Thank you. And finally, trustees, if I could, a word of thanks to you. I know how hard you work in your communities. I know how much you love your communities and the students that we serve across Upper Canada. And although we've gone down some challenging paths sometimes together, I've always felt respected as a member of the senior team and prior management before that. So thank you for that. And there's a couple of people around the table. I've been with you since the very beginning, David and Trustee McPherson, and a few others I've seen in multiple roles, principals and trustees. So it's been a very, very special time for me, and I appreciate it greatly. So overall, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Director, 11:01, your comments, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, we're all thinking about our students and our staff in schools as we close off this school year. It's been a very busy one, but it's been very rewarding as well. We talk about achievements and accomplishments, and there are so many to choose from. I know that the board has been seeing a number of different press releases over the last little while, things about our good works conducted by our students, their success athletically. We have a number of gold medalists, really exciting stuff that we see because it speaks to hard work, determination, and all the people that got them there across the line to medal and be proud, including their families. We also have our academic pursuits, of course, and there's many things that have been identified over the last 6 weeks where we're really proud of our students and their achievement. A particular note, of course, is that we're thinking about our secondary school students in 2 ways. Right now, our final exam period is upon us, and it starts this week. And so we wish them always the very best. We want them to take good care of themselves as they study, and to make sure they get good rest and go with a good mind, knowing that they already know so much about their learning. And this is just one further opportunity to show all the things we've seen this past year. We're also thinking about our graduates as they're getting ready to start their convocation commencement ceremonies. Myself, Trustee McCrae, and Chair McAllister were at the Brockville graduation of the T.R. Leger program here in the community, Prescott, Kempville, and Brockville. They're such rewarding moments, and you see the joy that our students and their families have, and their ambitions for the future. We're in great hands, and it's very pleasing for me to be able to tell you that. So we do wish our students all the very great success. We look forward to seeing them and their families and our staff at the graduations over the next couple of weeks, and being part of those family events are always a pleasure and a privilege for us. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll turn that back over to you.
Thank you. I just have a few comments, just to reiterate what the director said. I certainly was at the Central Region T.R. Leger graduation last night, but also on Monday night, I was at the Rockland Optimist Club for the Prescott Russell T.R. Leger graduation. And both of them were truly motivational and inspirational. And it was great to see how much the graduates appreciated their teachers, their educational assistants, their support staff, and their principal. It was really a very rewarding experience, and one I recommend to all of you if you get a chance to go to a TR grad. So that concludes my comments. We're going to move to 1401, to the report of the Special Education Advisory Committee. Trustee McPherson. Chair
Thank you.
McPherson. Vice Chair.
Yes. SEAC met last night, so I'm bringing forward the motion that was passed by SEAC last night. And just let me find it here.
I can read it for you if you want.
I know it's in here somewhere. Okay, right here. That the Upper Canada District School Board, it is recommended that the Upper Canada District School Board approves the revisions to the Special Education Plan for 2019-2020 as presented June 19, 2019, based upon the recommendations from the Special Education Advisory Committee on June 18, 2019.
As mover of the motion, would you care to speak to it?
Essentially, we have done what we are mandated to do, and that is to review the spec ed plan essentially from one end to the other. And there was some largely just updates in job positions or descriptions or who's in the spot. And so you have it attached here, and basically we made the recommendation.
Any further discussion? Questions? Seeing none, would you cast your ballot online for that motion, please?
We need a seconder.
Oh, and then you seconder. Yes, I do. Seconder, please. Trustee McCrae? Thank you. We don't need to read that again, I believe. And there is the vote. The motion is carried. Anything else, Trustee McPherson?
No, that's it.
1402, report of the Policy Committee. Trustee Cram, I'm going to turn this portion of the meeting over to you.
Thank you, Chair. As you can see by the report, we have currently reviewed 7 out of approximately 84 policies with the intent of presenting them to the board at and a time where Management Council feels that the presentation will fit into the agenda planning. We do expect that the amount presented at any one time will be an appropriate amount depending on the board agenda. It's our intent to have all 80-some policies reviewed at least every two-year period. We feel that we have had a successful start at the review process, and our next meeting is scheduled for October here at the Brockville office. We will endeavor to have 4 meetings each year, and we look forward to presenting in the fall the reviewed policies.
Thank you, Trustee Crum. Are there any questions? Thank you. We will move on to scheduled business 15.01, and I'm pleased to turn this portion of the meeting over to Student Trustee Bush-Rodney.
Chair, through you, this is just my term in review presentation. So just to begin, my journey as student trustee began around this time last year, although my official term did not begin until August 1st. As soon as I was elected as the student trustee, thank you. Over? Oh, okay. As soon as I was elected as the student trustee for the 2018 and 2019 school year, Marshall and I met to discuss ideas and initiatives for the coming year. We shared similar ideas for Student Senate. I wanted to continue with the structure set up from last year. Student senators would join working groups that best suit their interests and passions. This year, the 4 working groups were Indigenous Relations, Student Achievement, Student Wellness, and Student Culture. The working groups discuss issues and resolutions which they bring to the student trustee, who brings it to the school board. Additionally, I wanted to increase awareness of Student Senate and the student trustee position in schools. This was accomplished at the January and February Student Senate meetings, where each pair of senators discussed among themselves ideas that they would like to implement in their own schools. This allowed each school to get a personalized initiative created by their own students. I would later follow up with the senators to see how their initiatives were doing within their respective schools and what support they needed to bring their thoughts to reality. Some popular ideas included a wellness space, therapy animals, and increased learning commons hours. Lastly, I wanted to have the student senators advise on how to solve some of the issues they identified. Like I mentioned earlier, this was accomplished through the working groups. Last May, Marshall and I traveled to Toronto for the Ontario Student Trustees Association's AGM. It was my first time traveling to a big city with only one other person, and this was reflected when I asked him if we should call a phone number to the taxi outside of Union Station, like we do in Brockville. At the conference, I ran for the Executive Council and was elected as the Professional Development Coordinator. As the conference ended, exec began talking about creating a vision document. Our dream was a comprehensive document created by the students for the students. In April, this project became a reality. The students' vision for education laid out a broad, bold, and ambitious roadmap to change our education system for the better. The vision document lays out 35 recommendations across 6 pillars. It is rooted in both research and student voice, incorporating results from 3 surveys from over 20,000 Ontario students in the past 7 years, and testimonials from students across the province. My research focused on rural guidance counselors, as our school board has a very unique pilot project that ended this school year. But the vision document was not my main responsibility at OSTA. As the professional development coordinator, my key responsibilities included organizing and running the 3 conferences of the year, which are the fall general meeting, the board council conference, and the annual general meeting. I was also the chair of the speaker subcommittee, which meant I was responsible for finding and coordinating the keynote speakers on behalf of the organization. Some notable keynote speakers include the Minister of Education, Lisa Thompson, Federal NDP leader Jagmeet Singh, and Chief Executive Officer of EQAO, Nora Marsh. Some more side tasks included designing and creating school board membership packages, aiding working groups with any professional development opportunities they would like to organize, and attending monthly executive meetings. I may be biased in saying this, but this year's Executive Council was one of the most successful in the organization's history. The organization has grown at an unprecedented rate, and we have built the foundation and framework for executive councils for years to come with the vision document. Some other accomplishments achieved this year were the highest number of student trustee registrations at all 3 conferences, excellent student trustee feedback, the creation of a student voice podcast, and a pre-budget submission. We added a new executive position, the outreach coordinator, who among many other responsibilities will be working with elementary schools, as student trustees represent all students. When talking about achievements like these, it is sometimes hard to look past the glamour of it all. This year, there were struggles, from things like timing of events on Student Senate agendas to things like replying to an email Lisa sent me in my head, but not electronically. I would like to take a moment to thank every person around this table and the former Board of Trustees for being so patient with me as I learned. I kept thinking of how to word how thankful I am for this school board support throughout the year, but I realized I couldn't put it into words. All I can say is thank you. And I will leave you with a quote from Winnie the Pooh. How lucky am I to have something that makes saying goodbye so hard. Thank you.
Well, student trustee Bushra, we want to recognize your work with us over the past year, and we hope, and we know, but judging by what you said, that the learning experience has been a valuable one for you. And it's been a valuable one for us too, because when you spoke, we listened, and you did bring a student voice to the board table, and and you did increase the awareness of the Senate and the student trustee position. So I think you've done a fine job. I'm going to ask your mentor. You really have two mentors. Trustee Cram, your trustee mentor, and your mother mentor, Lisa. So, and Director, I guess we have a presentation tonight.
So, Mr. Chair, through you, what we really admire and appreciate about student leadership is that it takes courage and presence and poise to be able to represent 27,000 different perspectives. And that's not easy on any given day, but we know that that Bushra has made every reasonable effort to be accessible and available and have visibility with her peers. She was always taking her work very earnestly, and we always could count on her to be very honest, I think, and forthright in projecting student voice and student opinions about matters that are of interest to them, that are of course interest to the board. So Bushra is doing two really important things, I think, at this moment. One is that she's closing off her responsibilities, although officially it's July 31st, so we may still be finding you and asking you some questions. But as well, Bushra is preparing to graduate. We're very proud of you. I know your family is as well, from Brockville Collegiate Institute. And she's preparing to go on to post-secondary studies at the University of Ottawa. So we're really proud of you that way, so congratulations. And so what the trustees have done is, on behalf of the table, assembled a care package to get you ready to make the transition. So it's good for a month, and then there's no excuses after that, right? So, Mr. Chair, on behalf of the board, I think you'd like to present this to Trustee Kadra to get her ready for her next step. And she has our sincere congratulations.
I think I covered it mostly in my presentation, but I just want to reiterate my thanks and my gratitude for this opportunity that I've been given at the school board. It is one that I've never experienced before, and I will never experience again. So thank you so much.
We are going to 1502, which is the 2019-2020 Board Credit and Lease Facility Resolutions. And I'll turn this over to Mr. Richard, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, this would be a normal standard operating procedure for the board each year to look at the credit facilities in place for the board. The bank requires that there actually be motions in place approving these lines. And you'll see there the recommended action. There's one credit facility for cash management, mainly in the amount of $25 million. You should know that there's presently no drawdown on that. That is in place in case you need it. The board is in a good position right now. Sometimes in early September, with the big draw on salaries and whatnot, and a bit of delay on the grant coming, you might dip into that for a short period of time until the grants come in, and then again in April. There's also one there for $3 million for short-term borrowing. That has been set up for mainly expenditures and acquisition of equipment through a fixed-term lease. If the board ever decides to actually go through and lease equipment for whatever economic reason. And then there is one for $20 million also for capital, and this is one that you would use when you're doing construction projects and whatnot, for short-term borrowing needs while you're waiting for the Ministry of Education funding to come in place while you're completing those projects. And then finally, a $2 million credit facility for letters of credit and letters of guarantee. There are some organizations, Mr. Chair, that actually require a letter of credit. Some municipalities have gone that route now. I know in Limestone they were doing that, and so it would be this facility that would be used to provide that letter of credit to anyone requesting that.
Okay, trustees, we have 4 motions in front of us, and I'm going to read them quickly as I can. I need a mover and a seconder for the first one. Trustee Cram, Trustee McPherson, that the Upper Canada District School Board authorizes administration to borrow funds as stipulated in Board Policy 325 cash management and consistent with the Board's banking contract for cash flow purposes and to support the operating needs of the Board in the amount of $25 million. Any discussion? Please cast your vote. Motion carries. Motion number 2, moved by Trustee Jacobs, Trustee McCray, that the Upper Canada District School Board authorize a lease facility with its bank, Royal Bank of Canada, in the amount of $3 million for short-term borrowing needs related to equipment expenditures and acquisition of equipment through fixed-term lease. Any discussion? Please cast your vote. All in favor? Hands up. Motion's carried.
In favor.
Motion number 3, moved by Trustee Parisien, Trustee Barry, that the Upper Canada District School Board authorize a credit facility with its bank, Royal Bank of Canada, RBC Royal Bank, in the amount of $20 million for short-term borrowing needs related to capital projects until such time as Ministry of Education funding is received. Any discussion? Please cast your ballot. Motion carries. Motion number 4, moved by Trustee Schooler, Trustee Jacobs, that the Upper Canada District School Board authorize a credit facility with its bank, RBC Royal Bank, in the amount of $2 million by ways of letters of credit and letters of guarantee. Any discussion? Questions? Cast your ballot, please. Motion carries. 1503, June 2019 capital update to the board, and I will turn this over to Mr. Hobbs, Superintendent of Human Resources and System Operations.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just checking in with Ms. Workman and see if she's advancing my slides for me. Thank you. It's my pleasure to bring to you a capital update. So this is an update that we do a few times a year to bring trustees up to date on issues around capital funding and some of the major projects that we have on the go for the upcoming school year. This year, the major thrust of my presentation will be the budget outlook for 2019 and beyond. I know that trustees, in addition, are always interested in some of the major approval to proceed projects that have high visibility in the communities and their respective wards, so I'll do my best to bring you up to speed on some of those. And then we also like to share some sample projects or to give you a flavor of the kind of work we're doing in summer 2019, as it does really represent the bulk of our construction season coming up when students are no longer in school. So for trustees that have been around the table for a number of years, they'd be familiar with this squished down table that gets a little bit smaller every year owing to the number of columns we have. But just to give you a flavor for, this is the staffing complement that we have in our design and construction division. So this is not the entire facilities department. The operations division of the facilities department includes all of our custodial staff, are in around the 200 FTE range, but as far as design and construction is concerned, you can see that we have for 1920, again, 9 full-time equivalent positions, totaling around $958,000 representing in salaries and benefits. For those of you who are newer to the table, you'll notice in the 15-16 year, the number of staff dropped from 18 to 8. That wasn't a reflection on any kind of departmental downsizing. It was just a transfer of responsibility of some maintenance and operations staff out of the design and construction area over to our operations staff area. So those staff are still in the department. They're just working under the operations area now. You'll also notice that in 2017-18, we went from 8 FTE to 9. So this includes our senior manager of design and construction, and a number of project managers that we have that are responsible for making sure that the 100 or so capital projects we have going on throughout the year get completed smoothly. That increase in FTE that year was a result of the fact that the Ministry of Education roughly doubled our regular capital allocation that year. It was between school condition improvement funding and regular renewal funding. And the volume of construction projects and the complexity of the projects we had increased proportionally, and so we felt we needed an extra pair of hands in the department to deal with that. And I'm pleased to report that in subsequent years since that time, that level of funding from the ministry has sustained itself. So we're still doing really the same volume of work, and in fact, not even spending the entire available capital budget that's available to us every year, just because the construction season is short and it's difficult to get that much work done in a short period of time. The next slide, again, will show you a little bit. I have this going all the way back to 2013 because it helps us in the department sort of see how our budget is evolving across the lines and to pick out trends that we want to watch. So really what you see is this table is broken down into 2 sections. The top section, number of rows, going from school renewal to greenhouse gas reduction. These represent categories of funding that the ministry provides us. And what you'll see predominantly now is that most of our funding consists of school renewal and school condition improvement funding. There are some capital funding allowances that are allocated towards specific projects like childcare capital at Cambridge, Nation View, and Rockland, but predominantly the preponderance of our capital funding comes in school renewal and school condition improvement. For this year, we have about $6.5 million that's been announced for 1920 in school renewal funding. That's capital funding. And you'll notice that under school condition improvement, the actual line in new funding is blank for 1920. However, since I created this PowerPoint, we've received an announcement from the ministry that there's been an additional $16.7 million in capital for school condition improvement that's been announced. So that hasn't, I didn't have an opportunity to add that into the spreadsheet, but that is there as well. So really if you add that 16 or so million in, we're just over $60 million in total available budget for capital projects that aren't related to school additions or new school construction for 1920. The bottom half of that sheet, if you will, really encompasses approval to proceed projects. So North Grenville District High School would represent an addition. Kemptville Public School, there are some still minor expenditures associated with that capital project to wind up, and also a childcare capital project that's ongoing. There's some wrap up or ongoing work with the new Brockville School, the new Cornwall School, the addition at Winchester, addition at Roxmore, and an addition at North Grenville District High School as well to accommodate more students. The total available funding for those projects is about $69 million, which means that all told for the capital design and construction branch, capital funding we have that's dedicated towards specific capital projects, about $130 million available to us for next year. We will not be able to obviously spend that amount of money, but the ministry allows us to carry forward unspent funds into subsequent years. So really it's about maximizing the amount of volume we can put through given the resources that we have available and the time that we have available, and making sure that we do really good quality projects rather than, you know, spending the money kind of without good due diligence. So moving forward, some of the capital projects that trustees may be interested in. Cornwall High School, as you know, in 2017, there was approximately $39.1 million allocated for a 1,400 pupil place facility. We're still working on site options. So when you're building new schools in established communities, as opposed to a planned subdivision that's going to be a new subdivision, it becomes very difficult at times to find suitable properties in an established community. So that's one of the challenges that we're having there. Generally speaking, what we find is that the land acquisition process when we're having these construction projects is the longest part of the process. By the time you find a site and then go through negotiation with a buyer who may not necessarily have anticipated selling their land for the purposes of a new school. Brockville Elementary School, we're still, as you know, we're still working on the land acquisition at 550 King Street, going through some last remaining due diligence phases in the acquisition. Going to be doing a repeat design of Bridgewood Public School and Kemptville Public School that both have been tremendously well received through their communities that have gone through a similar process. The Roxmore addition associated with the closure of North Stormont, and also a previously approved daycare capital addition, has been recently approved by the ministry to proceed. So our team has met and restated the schedule for that project. We anticipate tendering for that project in the fall, with construction happening in 2020 and opening in 2021. And then finally, the North Grenville District High School addition. So $6.6 million was awarded under the Capital Priorities Program for a 221 pupil place addition to North Grenville District High School, which will include another gym. We're actually in the site plan approval phase and expecting a September 2021 opening for that, if all goes according to plan. So one of the things that we're very encouraged by is, I think when we had our new government that was elected last June timeframe, they took some time, I think, to get their feet under them with respect to the capital portfolio, and we're starting to see things moving again. So we're really encouraged by that and hopeful that even the ministry is going to open another capital priorities window where we can start submitting business cases for projects for consideration once again later this year. Moving on. Some of the major childcare capital projects that you may be aware of. Cambridge Public School, we have an addition that's been approved for preschool, 16 spaces of $421,000. Obviously, Roxmore, there's an addition. In addition to the additional classroom space, there is a childcare capital project that we're bundling together, $500,000, excuse me. Winchester Public School, there's an addition for infants, 10 spaces, toddler 15 spaces, and 24 spaces for preschool, totaling $1.5 million. As Trustee Barry will tell you, that's wrapped up with a rather complex work with the municipality to reconfigure some of the traffic around the school at the same time. So oftentimes we're building additions, we try to do a bunch of associated improvements at the same time. And so we're working through that. It's going well. Kemptville Public School, addition for infants, 10 spaces, 15 spaces for toddler, 24 spaces for preschool, and an early on center, 2 rooms, so $2.672 million that we're in the design phase, putting an addition on a brand new school pretty much, which is an interesting process, but one we're prepared for. The Brockville K-6 new school, as I mentioned, there's also an addition that's already been approved for childcare there, totaling $3.5 million. And at Rockland Public School, some renovations for toddler spaces and preschool spaces. So you can see here, even with these projects alone, they're fairly big and complex projects. So moving on to give you a little bit of a flavor for some of the things we're doing. I highlight this one. This is a photograph of the stairwells at South Grenville District High School. So if you go back to that, if you were to think back to that spreadsheet I showed you earlier on that was in 2 sections, at the bottom there were the approval to proceed projects that were additions and new builds, that kind of thing. And on the top there was school condition improvement and renewal. This is the kind of project we're doing out of that: school renewal, school condition improvement. So they tend to be smaller projects betterments to the buildings that we've already got rather than additions or net new spaces. So this was something that's kind of interesting because oftentimes we're driven by the building code or the fire code. In this case, what we found is that when we moved the school to 7-8, the spacing of the actual posts on the stairwell were suited towards older kids with larger heads. And what we were finding was that smaller kids could get their heads through the spaces. So these were perfectly fine according to the building code, perfectly fine for a 9 to 12 school, but the kind of work that the team does is they're starting to go out and look and say, does this fit for a school that now has smaller people in it? So we've done all this infill, replaced some of the railings in the gym to make them safer for smaller kids. So that's just an example of looking at some of the safety and accessibility work we do, usually bundled in with a bigger project. Moving to the next slide, this is some work that we're doing at Pleasant Corners. So again, what you'll find oftentimes now, as I've mentioned in the past, how we get around the tightness of our facilities operations and maintenance budget is we tend to try and bundle in what we would normally consider to be an operations and maintenance project with a larger capital project, because instead of trying to squeeze money to do painting out of a very tight operations budget, we try to bundle that painting into a capital budget where we have obviously more room. So Pleasant Corners we've been working on for a number of years, and this year we're doing roofing replacement, installing a lift for accessibility, a third phase of site works that includes accessible parking and drop-off in addition to the paving we've done there in previous years. We're improving the front entrance. So as you know, part of my favorite branding initiative is looking at curb appeal. So we've been putting canopies on schools on front entrances where it's possible so that people have a comfortable and safe place to wait or to buzz in and wait while they're buzzing into the school instead of getting rained on. You'll see things like that happening at Westminster and TIS here locally, where we put those kinds of canopies on. We're replacing all the brick veneer on the school, replacing exterior doors and windows, and we're also replacing or putting in new exterior street signage that you've seen in previous presentations. Moving on to the next slide, this is an example of some of the branding work. So I think at a previous update, I showed you some of the street signage the proposed approach for street signage. North Grenville District High School is the first school to receive that sign. And we're doing a number, I think around 8 more schools this year are getting that new style of street sign that's going to clearly identify our school, the name and the address. And we're also finishing off the remaining wall signage. So as you'll know, we've been on the wall for about 3 years, putting the name of the school and Upper Canada District School Board below it, and by the end of August we'll have finished off all of our schools. So that continues. And then finally, just another example of bundling projects together. Maple Grove Public School. We're already doing some work there now, just because this construction season is so short where it's safe for students. We can sort of push that out sometimes and get a little start earlier. So replacing the septic bed, replacing sidewalks, selected exterior doors, improving canopy, installing new board lettering, installing new street signage, replacing playground equipment, protective surfacing to be Accessibility for Ontarians with Disability Act compliant and Day Nurseries Act compliant, installing exterior doors, and replacing all the asphalting areas. So when kids show up for school, it'll look pretty different in the fall, which we're excited about. And that represents my update for today.
Thank you, Mr. Hobbs. Trustees, do you have any questions? Trustee Cram?
Thank you, Chair. I have to get my plug in here, Superintendent Hobbs. I noticed that in your presentation you were saying that there's a request for opening of projected projects, that the ministry is opening up that window. And also noticed that there's a little bit of extra funding. I know the community of CPHS would really love to get a hold of that with their overcrowding of their secondary schools. So it's my plug for next year.
Noted, thank you.
Can I put in a plug?
Yes, I think you're going to anyway, Trustee McPherson.
I'm not repeating myself, but I need to remind you that there's a secondary school in Perth that dates back to 1892. So if something shows up in your crystal ball, I think I should be ahead of this fellow.
You bet.
Any other questions or comments? Trustee Barry?
Through you, Mr. Chair.
I lived in the village of Winchester for 33 years and thought that possibly in my career as a teacher I might end up working in Winchester. One of the reasons I didn't want to, and Susan's very familiar, and having been a principal there, is the old high school burned, and that's the playground, and the students walk across the road to the playground. Nobody's ever been killed there, nobody's been ever really seriously hurt there, and that's a credit to, because everybody knows, and it is the entrance to Winchester District Hospital. So you can't put a speed bump on it. And a credit to somebody in the past, possibly a past trustee, but when I arrived on board, it was this, the project that Jeremy has just mentioned is in the works, and it will be a proud moment if I'm part of this board and that project comes to completion and a good, safe crosswalk is made there. It will be an improvement that every trustee and every member of this board can be proud of, because it's been long coming. It's been, as long as since the high school burned, they've been walking across there, and nobody has come to grips with that. So my compliments to you, sir, and to the past board. Thank you.
Thank you.
May I just ask a question?
Trustee McCray?
Thank you. Could I get a copy of that business case for the Brockville School?
Mr. Chair, we'll look into that and we'll get back to the trustee.
Was that like a yes?
He said you'll get back, look into it and get back to you.
Good.
Yes, Trustee Swan?
Are crosswalks not a municipal undertaking, and we do not spend money on them as a board?
Alex?
Well, that's an interesting question. The strict answer is yes, but oftentimes we find ourselves working with the municipality on works that are related, closely related. So in this particular case, we own responsibility for the traffic routing on site. And we own responsibility for parking that occurs on our property, and we own responsibility for how we choose to use the property that's across the street that Trustee Barry referred to. So, you know, I think that we're very conversant, I think, as a staff with making sure that we don't find ourselves, we try to avoid putting ourselves in this scenario of paying for things that would more rightly be another entity's responsibility. We also recognize the need, I think, for collaboration and cooperation to come together and work together to get things, to get a larger vision accomplished. So, you know, I'm very confident, I think, that we can say that when we do these kinds of integrated projects, we're not, you know, putting money where it shouldn't go or in an area of someone else's responsibility. We're really trying to figure out how we take our respective pools of money and put them together at the same time to get the best possible result for the community.
I have a question for you, Trustee Hobbs. You mentioned the new Brockville Elementary School is based on a repeat design, I think, of Bridgewood and Kempville. Whenever you do a repeat design, are there changes made?
Mr. Chair, actually, yes. When we did Kempville, and you'll also know that North Granville District High School is basically a repeat design of Vankleek Hill Collegiate Institute. So one of the practices, and we did this at KPS, is we brought in the principal of Bridgewood and some of the staff from Bridgewood as we were going into the construction process. Actually, before we went into the construction process, and talk to them about changes that they might want to make to the design. We also take the incoming principal of the new school and bring them to the, you know, we brought them to Bridgewood and had them look around to make some suggestions. So, you know, oftentimes there's also, you know, we also have to make some significant changes, even though it's a repeat design, to deal with the sometimes there's some unique requirements that the local municipality will have, and sometimes there's also some site conditions that we need to address. Could be stormwater management or things that need to be addressed to deal with the unique topography of the site. So there is a phase in every project where there's some tweaks to be made, and so we like to think that rather than just a rubber stamp, we do provide the people who are most familiar with the school the opportunity to have some input into how to refine the design without losing all the benefit that we get out of doing a repeat design.
Person?
Okay, thank you. Just out of curiosity, when you talk about a standardized design, Both Montague and Stewart were built on similar floor plans. Do you have a inventory of school designs that you call upon, or do you just change the one that you're going to use from time to time? I realize they opened 10 or 12 years ago, so.
Yeah. Through you, Mr. Chair, we generally, no, we don't have a stable of designs. We typically will, you get to the point where a design becomes old enough that, the building code changes and, there may be program requirements that change or technologies that change or philosophies that change, and it becomes necessary to rethink it and just refresh it. So, really, I would say there's probably a shelf life, and after which you might decide to get on with something else. Really, for us, the benefit of a repeat design is really significant in terms of financials. So you're talking about maybe 5-6 percentage points in terms of consultant cost savings associated with doing a repeat, even with that phase of tweaking involved in it.
Yeah, thank you.
Trustee Kohler?
Through you, Chair. Just picking up on the safety and safe access question, perhaps, that Trustee Barry mentioned. And noting that some of our schools are on major thoroughfares, including 80-kilometer-a-mile-an-hour highways. I passed Castor Valley Public School today, which is south end Ottawa Carleton, I believe. And I noted that they're on a fairly major thoroughfare, and they have the signage indicating that it's a school zone, but they also have the lighted sign that indicates what speed you're traveling at, red if you're over the 80, you're familiar with that, of course. Is that something that we would initiate as a school board if we requested that to increase safety, to the accessibility of the school for parents and buses, or is that something that comes from the municipality?
Through Mr. Chair, it can be both, actually, and it's a little bit different working in our environment compared to, say, in Ottawa Carleton, because we overlap, I think, 26 different sort of municipal entities, and sometimes multiple at the same time. So by way of example, at Kemptville Public School, we're on a county road, so we're dealing with the United Counties of Leeds and Grenville in terms of bus turning lanes. But we're dealing with the municipality in terms of the sort of OP and what their building requirements are. Sometimes it'll be, so what you'll find is sometimes it's the principal who has a local contact or knows somebody who's on municipal staff who will open that conversation. They might open it with the local police. It's a municipal responsibility. And sometimes they'll come to us to help sort of steer it. So really, I think that the first thing is we're not really particularly picky on where the impetus for it comes from. And as a facilities department, we tend not to make that a matter of course. We'll go and just ask the municipality. But if a principal were to deem it necessary and the municipality hasn't already suggested it, we'd be happy to support that.
I asked the question as a parent who picks up and drops off a student at Lombardy Public School on Highway 15, and it's a bit of a concern at that particular school.
So noted, trustees. I think we've had a fulsome period of questions. Could we move on? Item 1504 is a review of the Upper Canada. Thank you, Mr. Hobbs. I'm sorry. Didn't mean to cut you off. It's a review of the Upper Canada District School Board Communications Policy 300, and notice of your motion was provided June the 5th. Trustee Barry, do you wish me to speak to this with you or not?
Certainly.
Then I will cede the chair to
Thank you.
Trustee McPherson.
Okay. We have a motion. I'll read the motion, then we'll ask for a mover and seconder. The Upper Canada District School Board directs the Policy Committee to review its communications policy, Policy 300, as part of the committee's annual work plan for 2019-2020. I need a mover. Trustee Barry, seconded by Trustee McAllister. Any questions?
Is that this notice of motion that I have in front of me?
Yes, it should be.
The longer version?
Yeah.
Could I ask a question upon it?
Certainly.
In the last paragraph, or in the last line of the last paragraph, it says annual communication plan. does that mean that will happen when the annual plan is presented or at every meeting?
Seeking clarification. Director Sliwa?
Mr. Chair, through you, from a conversation I've had with Trustee Barry and Trustee Cram in an earlier dialogue, my understanding that was in advance of any communication plan being presented.
Okay. That satisfy your question?
Well, I thought I understood this. Is it going to happen so that if there's interest, there's some particular stakeholder has come to a trustee, that it can be brought forward at each meeting, or is it in conjunction with the communication plan?
Director Sliwa?
So, Mr. Chair, through you, my understanding is that, as you know, the staff makes an annual presentation of its communication plan before it hits the table. This would be some of the factors and information that would be taken into account before that presentation was made to the board.
Okay. Speak to the motion, Trustee Barry.
It's very simple. I've had an interested pair of citizens talk to me about some of the content of the website, and I too feel that it should be modernized and could be examined. And there presently isn't as much of a vehicle for participation from the board level. So I propose this examination of the communications policy.
May I ask a question, clarification?
I have Trustee McAllister, McCray, and you, Trustee Swan.
Thank you.
I support Trustee Barry's motion here because I think it's been a number of years since the policy has been reviewed, and there certainly are some areas for improvement. So this would be a good vehicle and a good time to do it.
Okay. Trustee McCray.
May I ask, was it your intention that this would be an annual thing or a regular thing?
I'm willing to work with the board in the existing policy, and I assume that it would be an annual thing. Yes, that's the way it's written, so I would assume so.
Okay.
But you simply have to work with what's before you, and the communications policy is there, and I propose some changes.
Okay, Trustee Swan, then Trustee Cram.
Just a question on my clarification is, I thought it was already reported to the board annually. So what are we really changing?
Trustee McAllister, if you would like to reply.
We're not changing the reporting procedure. We're looking at review with possible changes to the policy, and it will be referred to the policy committee.
Okay, thank you.
Trustee Cram.
Thank you, Chair. As Chair of the Policy Committee, the way I would read this is, if we are going to review the communication plan, that trustees should have an opportunity to put any input in before the plan is developed. Because I think that's a missing step that we have now, that the trustees aren't really involved with the policy or with the plan first. That's the way I would read this.
Okay. Any further discussion?
Call the question.
Yes, I'll call the question. Cast your votes, please. And motion carried. And I hand the chair back to Chair McAllister.
Thank you. Item 1505, we are at the Director of Education's 2018-2019 Work Plan and Status Report number 3, June 2019. And I turn the floor over to Director Sliwa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, trustees, in tonight's report, the landing page report provides a general overview about this check-in point for our annual work plan. As you know, our work plan is driven by the board's work plan, and the board's work plan is driven by the board's strategic plan. So I'm very pleased to be able to bring to you some of those highlights. The very final snapshot about what we did achieve and the different goals and actions will be brought forward to you, of course, in September once the school year has finished, and some key efforts to tabulate results based on the individual 13 actions have been addressed. The general outcomes, however, I'm very pleased to report that trustees will know that there are 13 key actions as part of the work plan this year, 4 goals that, of course, that we're addressing, and that 10 out of those 13 actions have been fully achieved. And that means that we're over the 3-quarter mark about things that we were intending to do that we thought would make a difference for schools or for students or our school system or our rapport with the local community is complete. And we look forward to being able to finalize some of that discussion when we present in September. Some of the actions that are still underway, however, are ones that are sort of stretch goals and take a little bit more time. One example is in goal number 4 in our collaboration with community. Working and engaging community and agency partners take time. We've had some very strong follow through on a couple of fronts. One was through some economic development summits that myself and our staff have been connected with, and that's had some very residual benefits in terms of follow through. I also credit the trustees around the table who have made some of those inroads as well. Trustee Schooler at Smith Falls is an example of that. The Chair McAllister and some inroads in terms of the Leeds Grenville community has also been very helpful. And so again, our action staff is to follow up and have some preliminary discussions. Anything that might materialize that would be of immediate interest to the board, you can count that we'll bring that back to you as time carries forth. Some of the specific goals that we wanted to highlight, however, is attached to this report. And I would ask trustees to take a careful view at their leisure. In the work plan document, after each goal, there is senior staff notes, and those senior staff notes detail the independent actions that have followed as evidence of, I think, our intent to engage, follow up, and follow through. There are some specific examples of that cited in the landing page report tonight, but really the details are within the director's work plan particularly, and I would indicate, I think it's in the report itself, pages 5 and 6, 9, 12 to 13, and page 16 provide those anecdotal pieces and evidence. So I'll stop there right now and see, Mr. Chair, whether or not there's any particular questions from the table at this time. I know that if last year is any indication, that the full engagement of the dialogue has often happened at the 4th quarter when the work was done, and because that leads to the next conversation about next steps and information that might be relevant to proceeding to go forward. So, Mr. Chair, I'll turn it back over to you, and I'd be pleased to see if there's any questions from the board.
Trustees, you have the report as well as the PowerPoint. Or do you have any questions of the director? Trustee Cram.
Thank you, Chair. One of the goals in the work plan this year was the increase of the graduation rate. How long does it take to get the results from the ministry as to the graduate from last year? Because I noticed we haven't got the 17-18 graduation rate yet.
Mr. Chair, through you, thank you for that question. I know that's a matter of interest to the board because they've set their goal for 90% graduation in 2020. The board may recall that in March of 2019, in our 2nd quarter report, we did provide some information with regards to that, and we did have the ministry count from 17-18. At that time, staff presented the 2 avenues in which we were doing our calculus of what was the outcome. If we use the ministry's report, we reported to the board in March of 2019 that our graduation rate remained at 24.6%, which it was in the previous year as well. However, when we use the Upper Canada District School Board count, which is including looking at our students beyond the ministry's snapshot, We reported 85.1% at that time. And we continue to track those grads. One of the comments around the table at that time was, do we stop counting after year 5? Knowing that we have our TR Leger program and knowing that we continue to have graduates continue, we do continue to track that. Our current count from that cohort is we are now at 86.92%. So that meant that we achieved what our graduation goal was for 17-18. I know that that discussion was something of interest to the board, and we did have some engagement on the March report, but I'll turn it back over to see if there's any other questions about the grad rate. And by the way, Mr. Chair, I should also say that Superintendent Coombs and Superintendent Dawes, who are both carrying that action goal number 1 about the 90% graduation rate, they would have the finer details and they would be prepared to speak to that this evening.
Trustee McDonald?
So when I review the report, I understand that the actions have been completed and achieved, but a lot of the priorities or a lot of the goals were aligned to specific results. And so I wasn't quite certain whether we achieved it in 18-19 because you had said 17-18, so I wanted to just clarify around whether we achieved the 2% increase in 18-19. And then with the other pieces, we've completed a lot of actions, but if we review what our results were for the last Ipsos survey, did we achieve those results there that we were looking to gain? And that's a measurement whether the goal is complete or not. For me anyway, I mean, it's fine that we do actions, but if a goal isn't achieved, then the status shouldn't be achieved.
So, Mr. Chair, through you, maybe I'll work backwards. So it was an important point that the trustees identified with regards to does the achievements resonate with the system, and if they do, in what way? I am certainly confident that in terms of our students and their well-being, so that's goal number 3 in our work plan and goal number 3 in the board's work plan, we are seeing some of those dividends, whether it's strictly attributable to 2017, 2018, I can't say for sure, but we do know that there has been some needles that have been moved there. Much of what we've been focusing on in this year for 18-19 has been around staff development and our Tier 1 area to focus on greater competency and capacity for our staff to engage students who are experiencing stress or are requiring some support in terms of mental health. We've also been working more consistently on school climate as it relates to social emotional learning for our students, and that's one of our actions as well. Moving to the previous question about the achievement of the graduation goals, I'm going to ask Superintendent Coombs to comment on our current state and our previous state from 17-18 and our current state as it rests right now for 18-19.
Thank you, Director, and through you, Mr. Chair. Currently, we're tracking a 5th-year cohort, and just for the information of those that might not be familiar, we track by cohort, which means the number of students who began in grade 9 with us. So our current 2019 graduation cohort began with us in grade 9 in 2014, September. At that time, 2,061 students began with us in grade 9. 28 since that time have left the province and the country and thereby are taken out of our graduation calculation. And we currently have 183 students who are left our board. Now, again, a reminder, those 183 students still count towards our graduation rate, although they are now out of our control directly. We anticipate at this time that if those 183 students, and we can tell over the past years historically how those kids do who leave us, and they generally graduate between a 60 and a 65% rate. If they stay with us, they graduate between an 85 and an 86% rate. So calculating in conservatively that let's say 60% of those students who have left us graduate in 5 years, then we are projecting an 85.5% graduation rate for our 2014 cohort. And I just want to reiterate what Director Sliwa also commented on. We are tracking them past that 5th year, so students can stay with us into day school up to the age of 21. And so our 6th year cohort rate, as Director Sliwa mentioned, is 86.92, and we will continue to track those students and support them going forward.
Trustee McDonald?
A follow-up. I believe when we talked about graduation rate, we're talking the ministry reports it on a 4-year.
5-year.
They report it on a 5-year? So on a 5-year, did we increase by 2%?
No, through me, Mr. Chair. Our 5-year graduation rate remained constant from the year before, 84.6.
Okay. So I have difficulty in then saying that goal 1 is achieved, because obviously the actions that were taken didn't achieve the goal we were attempting to mark. And I would be interested to know, based on the information that we have from Ipsos and we provided in the culture survey, how did we do on those other goals? So I would like to see this report come back to us in the fall with some alignment to those pieces, and specifically talking whether we've achieved the goal or not. Not the specific actions. The specific actions are important, but I think it's important for us to know whether we've achieved a goal if we've set it as a goal.
I believe the director has noted that.
Thank you, sir.
Any further questions of the director and his report? Now is the time, ladies and gentlemen. Seeing none. Thank you, Director.
Thank you.
Item 1506, proposed budget, 2019-2020. I know this is of particular interest this evening to many of you, especially those of you who are at the back of the room, and I do want to welcome you. It's my duty, I feel, to place make a few contextual comments here. We began this discussion last week, and we committed by motion at that point to a balanced budget. And doing so while attending to our budgetary principles. And now it's time to carry forth that decision tonight, and I would like to reinforce just the 5 principles that we used. The first one was that the board was committed to a balanced budget. Second, that efficiencies were to be realized with the goal of minimizing the impact on students in the classroom. And 3, we sought to align our spending as much as possible with the actual revenues from the province. 4, the efficiencies would be sought in all areas of the board's operation. And finally, 5, we directed our senior staff to seek and implement innovative practices wherever possible. So let's use this opportunity, trustees, to confirm our commitment and direction with the proposed budget, to build on last week's motion, and to exert our leadership to pass the budget this evening. Doing so will permit staff to use the limited time that remains to implement our decisions and support those who may be impacted by the change. I want to remind trustees and the public about the context for our situation, which I mentioned in my comments at last week's meeting. We are doing our part as a responsible and respected stewards of the resources provided to us by the taxpayers of Ontario. And this is the new reality that we all face in our leadership work when delivering valued programs and services. Notwithstanding these obligations, we all find the task of reducing an $11.7 million deficit to be overwhelming and one of the greatest challenges as elected officials who understand the value of a good, safe, accessible, publicly funded education for our children and grandchildren. At the end of this process, we need to say that we did the best we could with the resources and the opportunities made available to the board. In my opinion, the board has never lost sight of this focus in our discussions and deliberations. It's my strongest recommendation to you that we finalize our dialogue this evening and commit to the budget that we have carefully and thoroughly reviewed. So with that, opening the floor to discussion. You have, and I will pass the baton over to Mr. Richard.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We're pleased to be able to bring to you this evening the proposed 2019-20 budget for the Board of Trustees deliberation and final approval. Tonight's presentation is actually the 8th in a series of budget-related reports that have been shared with trustees. If we go back all the way to April 10th, each one building on the previous report and providing budget information that became available and continuing while the complete proposed budget was being developed along the way. Mr. Chair, despite the delayed release of the grants for student needs, known better as the GSNs, the technical paper and the EFS budget forms, the finance team has now consolidated the various expense budget submissions of all Upper Canada DSB budget owners, accounted for all revenues, incorporated the budgets of our related parties, made appropriate changes to the expense budget based on the direction provided by the trustees over the meetings, and now have a clear picture of the complete proposed budget for 2019-20. Various budget expense pressures for the 2019-20 fiscal year were identified early in the budget process as a result of the provincial government's reductions in various grants as part of the release of the GSNs. The senior team prepared by developing expense reduction scenarios throughout the spring for the trustees' consideration throughout the budget process. Mr. Chair, I'm most pleased to report that these efforts have been very successful in mitigating the budget impact of these fiscal pressures. For the Upper Canada District School Board, the resulting bottom line is a balanced budget as measured for compliance purposes by the Ministry of Education. Mr. Chair, of course, this is an operational plan at this time, and as the next school year unfolds and as new information comes to light, as it always does, adjustments will be required, always with student learning as a priority, as you've indicated, Mr. Chair, as we focus on our mission of preparing all students for a successful life. Trustees also have in their agendas a full detailed package that includes many schedules that provide the specific monetary amounts that are the basis for the presentation before you this evening. Comparisons of the proposed original budget for 2019-20 are made to the approved original budget of 2018-19, which the previous Board of Trustees approved last May, and they are provided along with a variance explanations. I will now, Mr. Chair, take the trustees through the presentation. You should be aware that in the budget booklet there were, it comes with the tight timelines to try and get all this information out to you. There were a few grammatical errors, a couple examples where it said lower and it was actually higher than that. We will fix those for the final distribution to the public. Mr. Chair, I know you've seen the Upper Canada District School Board financial cycle a couple of times, but just to nail down, as highlighted by the red square on the slide, you'll see it indicates that the 2019 budget is due to the Ministry of Education by June 28th, which is actually next week. Mr. Chair, I should take a moment. I would be remiss if at this point I did not recognize and highly commend the financial team for having the complete budget ready for the board meeting this evening. As I indicated, I think, at a previous meeting, the financial cycle laid out in the slide shows that they achieved this despite the very late release of the GSNs and supplementary information, and even though they just completed and submitted to the ministry the 7th-month report, which is actually a mini year-end for the board. As well, they've been preparing for the development of financial forecast number 3, which will be presented to the board later in this meeting. And they have already begun the audit process for the completion of the 2018-19 financial statements, which will be presented to the board in November of this year. And of course, other priority projects have also impacted. I think it goes without saying that the two outstanding leaders to my right and left, and that is Controller Kingston and Manager Law, are the two exceptional leaders that lead that team, and they've done an outstanding job. Mr. Chair, this slide on assumptions and notes is key in terms of relaying the context within which the budget has been developed and the approach taken during the process. Given the role of our student enrollment in the calculation of our municipal funding, it is important to note that the draft budget has been completed based on projected 2019-20 enrollment as developed by the Planning Department as of April 9, 2019. As is our normal practice, this budget only announced Ministry of Education grants that have been confirmed are included in the budget for our board. Examples of grants that were received in 2018-19 fiscal year but that have not been confirmed for our board in 2019-20 include, you won't be surprised, we've indicated several occasions, are mainly the PPFs, Priority and Partnership funds that were previously known as EPOs, and they include things like math, mental health and well-being, and student pathways, but to name a few. We do anticipate information coming subsequent to the budget process, and we'll certainly report back on that as the year unfolds. As noted earlier, Mr. Chair, the year-over-year analysis contained in this presentation is based on a comparison of the data contained in the approved 2018-19 original budget versus the data in this evening's proposed 2019-20 budget. If we look briefly at the projected enrollment for 1920, you'll see that these projected enrollment figures reflect both pupils of the board upon which the ministry grants are based, as well as tuition fee paying students, which would include Indigenous students and international education students. Trustees will note from the slide that the elementary panel is pretty much fully stabilized at this point. Next year, we anticipate a small decrease in enrollment. And for the information of the board, just a reminder, for 2018-19, the board actually experienced an increase in enrollment. So it has stabilized for the most part. Enrollment at the secondary level is anticipated to drop for the 2019 budget year, and we're expecting approximately 109.4 in the secondary student enrollment. Our adult and continuing education other enrollment is anticipated, as you can see, a small decline over the year, the bulk of which is in the area of adult day school and continuing education. If we actually move to some of the significant figures, Mr. Chair, on the next slide, we look at the revenue comparison of statement of operations. You'll see there all of the GSN information received to date, along with projected enrollment data, are reflected in this slide. The first line, Mr. Chair, ministry grant allocations, or GSNs, shows a net decrease of approximately $0.4 million, which is comprised of the net impact of both grant increases and decreases. Significant components of the resulting decrease include enrollment-driven change, and I know that was a question by Trustee Berry at the last meeting, and it results in a decrease of approximately $1.9 million in the revenue. Now, however, that's not a net impact, obviously, on the budget, because there are expenses which can be reduced, such as in teachers. Non-enrollment driven change, secondary class size change, and I know trustees are aware, from 22 to 28 represents a decrease of approximately $9.3 million in the secondary pupil foundation grant. However, that is offset by the teacher job protection funding that was introduced in 1920, and that's approximately $7.5 million in new funding to offset the loss in grant due to the class size change. And also, Mr. Chair, you'll recall that throughout the meetings we highlighted for the board the loss in the local priorities funding for 1920, which was in the last couple of years and ends August 31st, 2019. That represents a reduction of $3.6 million in funding. And then finally, transportation stabilization grant. I think it's important to highlight the good news too, Mr. Chair, and that was approximately $3.94 million in new funding for the board to cover deficits from student transportation coming out of 2018-19. And as a result of that funding, there'll be no impact on the 2019-20 budget as a result of the arbitration decision that was imposed on the board. We then move to the line for provincial grants, other. This includes priority and partnership funds, formerly known, as I indicated earlier, the EPO grants, as well as grants from other provincial ministries, example, Ministry of Colleges and Universities. This line reflects a decrease, as you can see, of approximately $1.8 million versus the same last year. And of course, the decrease is due primarily to the significant reduction in the ministry announced PPFs at this time. We do anticipate that gap to close as the year progresses, as we hope to get many more announcements of PPFs coming forward. An increase in First Nation projected enrollment accounts for most of the increase in the next line, Mr. Chair, the federal grants and fees. Overall, we expect ADE up of 45 for the First Nations projected enrollment. On the investment income, it's forecasted to increase by $70,000 approximately. That was one of the very small errors in the booklet. It actually indicated that it was going down, but it actually is increasing by approximately $70,000. The estimate for interest revenue that staff use is usually based on a historical 3-year average. Also, as you know, the Bank of Canada prime interest rate has increased from approximately 0.75% as of July 2017 to 1.75% as of May 2019. And it obviously is one of the key drivers in estimating our interest revenue. So that's why we're estimating it might be up a bit next year. We are projecting a reduction in revenue from other sources, mainly due to a projected decrease in international education enrollment for 2019-20, as well as the Ministry of Education's new clawback of $1,300 for every international student enrolled in the board. And I think it's important we highlight, Mr. Chair, for the trustees that the planning department's being quite conservative in terms of projecting the enrollment for international education. And so basically at this point in time, we look at actually students that are registered with the board. Now, over the past, there has been indication that between now and the start of the new school year that we hope to get additional enrollment, but we're always conservative when we look at the budget in the spring. Deferred capital contributions line, that's simply bringing revenue in that was previously deferred to match the estimated depreciation of our supported assets. The increase is related to full-year depreciation expenses related to 2018-19 additions and additional planned capital spending during 2019-20, as was relayed to you earlier in the meeting by Superintendent Hobbs. And finally, Mr. Chair, for school-generated funds, we're projecting a slight decrease in the fundraising revenue for next year. We move to slide number 6. It provides more details with respect to the expenses. Mr. Chair, since a large portion, that is about 75 to 80% of the board's operating budget relates to employee salary and benefit costs, the negotiated and funded increases in salaries and the associated benefit costs obviously have an impact on the board's expenses. That is particularly evident in the instruction line since it is heavily weighted with staffing-related costs. This line reflects salary and benefit benchmark increases for teachers, educational assistants, principals, vice principals, school office staff, and any other salaries, both permanent and casual, considered by the Ministry of Education to be directly connected with instruction. Mr. Chair, despite these identified increases, trustees will note an overall significant decrease in overall expenses, and this is primarily due to the various reductions in staffing made throughout the system in order to better align expenses with the actual funding being received by the Ministry of Education. And of course, that was included in your deliberations over the last several months. The projected decrease in the administration and governance expense line is also attributed mainly to staffing reductions across several departments. The transportation line reflects incremental expenses partially funded by the 4% cost update that was received when the GSNs were announced, which just happens to be identical to the same increase that was announced for 2018-19. Also, this expense line includes projected significantly higher student transportation spending as a result, of course, of the arbitration award imposed on the board after the 2018-19 original budget was approved by trustees in May of 2018. Moving to the pupil accommodation line, this decrease is due primarily to a reduction in expenses based on the trustee-approved budget consideration related to reduced operating and maintenance cost of board-owned properties. The other non-operating line shows a small decrease related to reduced expenses projected for UCLC and Champion for Kids. The amortization expense line shows an increase due to higher planned capital spending this coming year, with almost all of it offset by the deferred capital contribution revenue, Mr. Chair, that we reviewed on a previous slide. Lastly, a small increase in the spending of school-generated funds, which includes field trips and excursions for schools, is projected for 2019-20. Given that school-generated funds revenues exceed expenditures, we anticipate a small increase in the surplus for this category at the end of the year. Mr. Chair, overall, we see a significant net decrease in planned expenses. That is almost $6 million. This figure includes the almost $11.7 million in planned spending reductions made by the board, and of course is offset by expense increases related to negotiated increases for salaries and benefits for all employee groups, increased costs for student transportation, and increased operating costs in facility services. The bottom line is that you are seeing on this slide indicates that the board projects an in-year surplus of approximately $5.7 million. However, as you're well aware, Mr. Chair, and I've indicated over the last several meetings, this is simply the traditional accounting view and is before the Ministry of Education required adjustments to both revenue and expenses for compliance purposes. We move to slide 7. Is our normal practice, Mr. Chair, particularly since the significant reductions in special education funding began. We provide a view specifically of the special education budget, albeit at a high level. There is more detailed view, as you are well aware, in the budget booklet. Primary contributors to the increase in special education revenue include additional special education per pupil amount, or SEPA funding for 1920, an increase in the special education equipment, or SEA amount for next year, as well as an increase in the behavior expertise amount. The primary contributors to the decrease in special education expenditures include decreased staffing at different levels throughout the special education organization, as well as some decreased costs for replacement costs for the various groups in that category. We look at slide 8, Mr. Chair. It shows the capital expenses planned for 1920 as part of the budget. I believe that Superintendent Hobbs has gone over most of that in his capital update. Maybe just highlight that the first 4 items on the list represent spending related to new school construction addition announcements confirmed by the Ministry of Education. The school condition improvement SEI line represents year 9 of this ministry grant, and I think Superintendent Hobbs went over that in detail. The 2019-20 school renewal plan includes spending based on the actual in-year 19-20 allocations from the ministry. Of interest might be in 18-19, the board approved actually using some of the deferred revenue to the tune of about $1.3 million. That there is no deferred revenue included this year. Child care capital spending relates to funding approvals, as you saw Superintendent Hobbs outline in his previous report earlier in the meeting. If we look at slide number 9, Mr. Chair, is this our focus as opposed to the PSAB or accounting view? We see here that the proposed 1920 budget, if approved, would result in a balanced operating budget for compliance purposes. This number differs from the accounting surplus of approximately $5.7 million, which we saw in an earlier slide. The reason for the difference is due to the Ministry of Education requirement to adjust revenue and expense lines for items that the ministry excludes from the compliance calculation. And probably the prime example of that would be the provision for the retirement gratuities liability. After taking into account these adjustments, though, the board's budget remains perfectly balanced and 100% ministry compliance. As well, the board is compliant with respect to the administration and governance envelope. Slide 10, Mr. Chair, 10 and 11 outlines details of the accumulated surplus and deficit. And it's based on the projected impact of the 1920 proposed budget, obviously, if it were approved by the board. The board's accumulated surplus is divided into 2 sections, the portion that is available for compliance, which is this slide, and then the balance, which is unavailable for compliance, since it has been deemed to be externally appropriated for compliance calculation purposes by the Ministry of Education. Mr. Chair, the first line indicates the unappropriated operating accumulated surplus, and I think in previous meetings I've referred to that. That is really what the board looks at when they're looking at what is, we used to term reserve for working funds, which is open for the board to use for specific purposes for which it would intend to use that. And you'll see there it's showing a deficit based on the 1920 budget of $4.3 million. And of course, the main reason is not surprising. It's related to the imposed stay-o arbitration decision, which was imposed on the board last year after approval of the 2018-19 budget. I would draw your attention to the bottom of the slide, Mr. Chair, where you'll see the in-year increase to the accumulated surplus. As you would expect, it is zero with a perfectly balanced and compliant budget. And that results in 1.8 million total accumulated surplus available for compliance. As you see, if we move to the next slide, unavailable for compliance, you'll see, Mr. Chair, the projected 2019-20 in-year surplus of 5.7 million listed at the bottom there, which of course is before compliance adjustments. When we look at that, you'll see that the retirement gratuity, which I indicated earlier, which is the main driver of the unavailable for compliance, almost $4 million, with some for employee future benefits, the accrued interest, and the next larger one, which is revenues recognized for land. Mr. Chair, that concludes the presentation. I'd be glad to take any questions that the trustees may have.
Thank you very much. Mr. Richard?
Through you, Chair, I have a question.
Yes, Trustee Swan?
We're getting a clawback on our international students. Is this a new thing as a result of the new government?
Mr. Chair, Trustee Swan is totally correct. It is a new proviso in the grants, a reduction for every student of $1,300. This proviso has been in the college system for years. It's only $750 for the colleges, but for some reason it's $1,300 for the K-12 sector at this point. It is new, and it has come into place with the new government. That's correct.
So basically, they aren't encouraging us to recruit students to increase our numbers in our schools. Is that correct? From from other countries outside of Canada.
Mr. Chair, I wouldn't want to speak for the Ministry of Education or the government, but I would be almost certain that they wouldn't frame it in that way. What they are indicating at the meetings we've been at and at the teleconferences is to make up for the capital that they inject in the system to build more pupil places and whatnot to accommodate these students, and that wasn't provided for, and they're using that as the justification for the clawback.
Thank you.
Further questions? Trustee McCray.
Thank you. Through you, Roger, would you take another run at trying to explain to me again on page 17 of the second report, the longer one, the one with the 37 pages, on page 17, about there's 3 of those categories that are on the positive side. And the one at the top, I'm having quite a problem trying to figure out with all the cuts that we're going to make. Could you try and explain that one to me again?
Mr. Chair, I believe Trustee McCray is referring to line 1 under classroom teachers. Certainly there's a lot of variables that go into that. One of the main ones, and I think I indicated earlier in the presentation, was the negotiated increases in the province for all staff. And so that 1% increase and any benefits that were negotiated would be included in that and would tend to increase that number in terms of expenses. In terms of certainly from a revenue point of view, the movement of the class size from 22 to 28 would obviously have an impact, and even with the transition funding given for the teacher protection, it would result in a loss of the grants. And of course, the reason you're not seeing as big a reduction there is that the board is honoring collective agreements, and in some case, certainly at this point in time, it's not as easy to make those reductions as would be able to do if certain conditions in the collective agreement weren't present.
Well,
Further questions?
thank you.
I would like to propose a motion, Chair.
I'm wondering, Trustee Swan, yes, I'm prepared to entertain that, but we have a motion on the floor.
Okay.
At least I'm going to put the motion on the floor. Would your motion be an amendment to that?
Well, I'd like to see the first motion.
Trustees, I will put the first motion on the floor. I need a mover and a seconder. Trustee McDonald? Trustee Cram? That the Upper Canada District School Board approves the 2019-2020 annual projected operating expenses of $364,465,016 and capital expenses of $46,906,815, plus all amounts subsequently allocated by the Ministry of Education. That is the motion. Would anyone care to speak to it? Would you care to make an amendment now?
Yes, that's not up from what we approved last time, is it?
Be prepared to do calculations.
Yes.
Is it?
Could you repeat your question again, please?
Is that amount encompassing the money that I'm looking at in the amount of $275,000?
Mr. Richard?
Mr. Chair, no, it would not at this point.
So I would like to make an amendment to it and increase that amount by $275,000, or I don't know if I should just amend the motion to include that we include in it to make the amount higher that we utilize this year's Learning Opportunity Grant envelope specifically for library staff in the amount of $150,000 and use the money from previous years that's in the deferred revenue account of $135,000 to fund our employees' learning commons and thus increase our budget amount. In principle, we're spending what we're funding for and aligning our spending with the provincial funding. And all I'm asking is to increase it by $275,000 approximately that is already funded.
I understand your motion. There are two questions. One, if it's necessary, because we could just simply be using the deferred amount from last year or this year, last year and this year, or we could go to a motion. Am I correct in that, Mr. Richard?
Pardon me, Mr. Chair?
Am I correct in assuming that we have two options here? One is to simply agree to use the deferred amounts from this year and last year for the purposes intended by Trustee Swan.
That's correct, Mr. Chair.
Or we could do it by motion.
Correct, Mr. Chair. Either one will work.
So
I just want to
it's your
ensure
call, Trustee Swan.
Well, I'd like to ensure that this money gets put in the budget and doesn't get overlooked because it is specifically for library funding for staff. And I'd like to use the previous amount that we've accumulated. It's already there. I don't trust the Ford government not to take away our deferred spending, and I want to make sure we have this. And it is at least some staff versus zero staff.
So, trustees, I need your opinion. Do you want the motion or do you want it by agreement? Trustee McPherson?
At your last meeting, you passed a motion approving the staffing report, which did not include those positions. You have a motion on the books that indicated that those positions would be eliminated. So now you're prepared to add back positions. So my feeling is you're going to have to rescind that previous motion.
Trustee, or Mr. Bouchard?
Mr. Chair, I don't know if the Secretary would like to confirm, but I believe the motion made only had to do with the one change in the special education component, which referred to different I believe, employee groups. There wasn't an actual motion on the whole.
So there was no motion on that.
I don't know. I'm just trying to recollect.
What does the Secretary of the Board think as per procedure? Because I want to ensure that these positions are included. We already have been giving the fund for it this year, and we have deferred funding, and I just want to add this funding into this year's budget.
Trustee McDonald?
Point of clarification, if the report for the 11.7 million that we approved included the reduction or elimination of those positions, to add them back in, then it would be going against the motion for the 11.7. If I'm reading it correctly, because we would have eliminated those positions.
But the motion only agreed to the funding that we were given. Nobody knew about this funding because it was put in a deferred account.
It is deferred funding.
It was in a different account. This isn't changing the budget line. It's not making us take from A to B or anything. This was deferred funding.
Trustee Swan, to make it clear, what is your motion?
Okay, my
Your
motion
amendment.
is, I have to turn pages here, that the Upper Canada District School Board utilize this year's 2019-20 Learning Opportunities Grant for library staffing, which is, and this is not part of it, which is enveloped only for library staffing, and also utilize the amount in the deferred revenue account to support library staffing.
Okay, just hang tight while
I'd like to put that on the table, and
Yes.
I'd like to.
We're trying to get it on the table now.
Okay, thank you.
The motion reads that the Upper Canada District School Board utilize this year's 2019-2020 Learning Opportunities Grant for library staffing that is enveloped for the Ministry of Education.
And also utilize the amount in the deferred revenue account to support library staffing. I want both pockets. I want the 150 and the
And also
130.
utilize the amount in the deferred funding for that envelope.
So, Mr. Chair, the deferred revenue is not part of the budget, so it would be not germane to passing the budget.
But they could add it in. Trustee McDonald?
It have to be different after. Like, we have a motion on the floor to pass a budget that's presented to us. We're not discussing deferred revenue or surpluses at this point.
So if people want to support me in this and using this funding, then we have to not pass what's on the table and then bring it back and then repass what was on the table, right? Just so we all vote and know what we're voting for. I'd like clarification, please.
Director?
Mr. Chair, through you, we have a motion on the table right now that the chair has already read. We have a separate motion that's talking about revenue that is available for 1920, specifically enveloped by the Ministry of Education. Looking at Mr. Richard here confirming that if that particular amendment was passed, that would not have any effect on the bottom line of what the board had established in its dialogue last week, and nor for what is proposed as the primary motion tonight.
So to respect Trustee Swan's intent, can we pass the main motion and still do what she wants?
Mr. Chair, through you, to specifically to that 150K, I believe, for this year, the answer is yes.
Mr. Chair, I just want to clarify, is it included in the main motion? Is it the one that you read?
The main one, yes.
364,
Yes.
465? Well, no, it would not be included in that unless the board included it and then added it to it.
So my question is, can we pass this motion, the main motion, and subsequently address her issue?
Correct, Mr. Chair, you could do that. That would be one option, yes.
Or could we just, to make it easier, amend the amount in the main motion to include the money that I'm citing, which is approximately $275,000, and just pass it with that number in because it's fully funded. I'm not taking from any other pocket other than where it was intended to go.
Trustee Cram?
Thank you, Chair. It's personal preference. On personal preference, I'd rather pass the motion as we said, and I agree with Trustee Swan. But I'd like to see a second motion coming after that to use the deferred money for that particular purpose. That takes it out of our budget deliberations. We don't have to alter any of the figures, and then we can make a separate motion to do what she would like to do.
Thank you, Trustee Cram. Is that satisfactory to you, Trustee Swan?
As long as I don't get rooked in this, I'm okay.
I promise I'll guarantee your minority right. Trustee McPherson?
I'm referring to the minutes of the previous meeting. And it says, with the amendment, trustees passed a motion to approve the recommended budget scenario with recommended reductions amounting to $11.7 million for 2019-2020 school year.
Yep.
That report included the staffing report.
And that is the 364,465,016.
So we approved the
So
staffing report.
let us vote on this motion first, and then we'll go to Trustee Swan's.
May I just ask Trustee McDonald's opinion on point of order on doing this? Because I don't want him all of a sudden to say we're out of order after we pass this and I can't do this.
I said I would guarantee your minority right, Trustee Swan. Okay, Trustee McCrae?
Well, I take from what Trustee McPherson has said that we agreed that we had passed a balanced budget. But what I find is this one that we had on May 29th that's been changed as of June 12th has more level 3 reductions, quite a bit more, and that bothers me. So I'm not sure of these procedures here at this table, but I know that I prefer the budget that was the balanced budget that we passed, or didn't pass, but we discussed as an option on May 29th, and there was some amendments made at the meeting on June 5th or 12th. I want it out there that I prefer the other one. Now, what's to be done?
Well, what's to be done is that we're going to move this motion, second it, and if you wish to make an amendment, then you're free to do that. So.
But the amendment would, okay.
Bottom line is we have a balanced budget. My problem deals with the staffing report, and I don't know where you're going to shoehorn that one in. And I have submitted the motion to both yourself and Lisa.
Is your motion an amendment?
No, it's a standalone motion because I have expressed my concerns about it, and it's not going to change the budget one penny. We are still going to have a balanced budget.
Then if it's not associated with the motion, let's present it later.
Okay, as long as I have an opportunity to present it.
I'll guarantee your minority right too.
Good for you.
Okay, may I follow up on Trustee McPherson's comment?
Yeah, Trustee McDonald? Okay, Trustee Swan, go ahead.
Okay, I think I know where Trustee McPherson's going, and I'm on board with him with some of this. So if we want to switch some numbers around after we pass this budget, can we switch some numbers around in the staffing component? Other than, like, mine's coming from out of some money I kind of realized was there. But he's looking at things that are already in there in the staffing component. Can we switch some of these numbers around after we pass this?
Mr. Richard, would you have any opinion on that?
Mr. Chair, I believe you go back, if you do pass the main motion, I believe the Secretary of the Board explained that there were certain rules of procedure there for you'd almost be either adding to it In the case of trustee Swan, she's simply adding to the budget that if you end up approving it, if you start to now go into the main motion and change, I believe some of the parameters put forth by the secretary of the board would come into play at that point.
Director?
Mr. Chair, through you, you have a motion on the floor currently. If there's any amendments, then people need to discuss those amendments specifically, vote on them. If they are passed, then they change the primary motion. If they are defeated, then we go back to the primary motion, and then you need to either call the question or discern if there's any more discussion necessary.
So do I have any amendments to the primary motion?
And I go after this, is this correct?
Yes.
And trustee McPherson should amend it now based on what his concerns are, that are probably more than one person's concern?
I think the staffing report, because it's not going to change the numbers, it's a moot point because the budget is going to remain the same. Because the budget does not contain the detailed information about the staffing report. It is simply a accounting of expenses and revenue.
So let us deal with it after.
Right, if that suits.
We have one motion on the floor so far.
Okay.
Is there an amendment?
Yes, I move an amendment that we return to the balanced budget that we discussed on May 29th before the revisions on June 5th.
And that figure being?
That figure being that there was more level 3 reductions in the June 5th budget than there were with the ones before, in the previous one.
The advice that I'm being given is that we will have to go into private session to discuss those amounts.
Take a motion for moving to private session.
I would entertain a motion to move into private session to discuss that.
Pardon me? Wouldn't there have to be a seconder for that amendment prior to?
Well, I'll second it because I want to make sure everyone knows what they're voting on, including myself.
Do we vote on the amendment first?
Yeah, that's right. So we have to get a seconder. We need to discuss it in private.
We will be reviewing the motion, not voting on it, but going into private to discuss it, and then back to pass it. Okay? Motion to go into private session, did I have that?
I second
Trustee
it.
Barry, trustee Swan. Show of hands. Opposed?
In favor.
It's carried. We're moving into private session for a short while.
And you'll have to chair it.
It's moved by trustee McCray, seconded by trustee McPherson, that the Upper Canada District School Board move back into the regular board meeting at 9:38. Would you please cast your vote? I think we're out of whack here because of the moving around, so could I have a show of hands, please?
No, I voted. I voted.
You voted? Yeah, I know, but it didn't come up, so. All those in favor of coming back into private session? Opposed?
Public session.
We're in public session there now. So we have a motion, an amendment on the floor to the main motion, which reads that the Upper Canada District School Board rescind resolution carried on June the 12th, 2019. And that motion read that the Upper Canada District School Board approve the green recommended budget scenario amounting to reductions of $11,698,021 as presented on June 12th, 2019 as the basis for our 2019-2020 budget calculations as amended. So that is the motion that we are going to rescind with this motion. Could you please cast your vote?
Discussion?
Any discussion?
Do I have a seconder for that?
You have a mover and a seconder?
Do we have a mover? A seconder? Trustee McPherson? Any discussion? To be clear, we will be voting on rescinding. All those in favor, cast your vote. I voted. It's
defeated.
The motion is defeated, which means that we are now back to the main motion. And I'm going to read the main motion one more time. That was already moved and seconded by trustee McDonald and trustee Cram, I believe, that the Upper Canada District School Board approves the 2019-20 annual projected operating expenses of $364,465,016 and capital expenses of $46,906,815, plus all amounts subsequently allocated by the Ministry of Education. Any further discussion? There being none, please cast your vote.
Carries.
Motion carries. We have a budget. Trustee Barry?
I propose a small break.
I agree.
Okay.
What don't we do to financial forecast? So
I was just going to ask for another motion, Mr. Chair.
Yes?
Just given some of the circumstances, I have a motion that funding to the UCDSB is dependent on many factors, most often through transfer payments or grants from the government. Should additional funds be provided by the government for the 2019-20 school year, that the director prepare a report on the increase in funds and the implication to the original budget passed on June 19th, 2019.
Have you sent that to?
Yeah, I sent it to, I'll send it to you.
That's number 2 here. I see it.
Number 1.
I think she has it as number 2 on the screen, but
Yep.
So this is a further motion?
A further motion, yes.
Yes.
Just one. Just the first one.
Is it going to be on the screen? Funding, the motion reads as follows. I think it's coming up on the screen in a moment.
It should be there.
I have it here, but funding to the UCDSB is dependent on many factors, but most often is through transfer payments or grants from the government. Should additional funds be provided by the government for the 2019-2020 year, that the director prepare a report on the increase in funds and the implication to the original budget passed for the school year 2019-2020. Trustee McDonald?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did have a seconder, but do we have a seconder on the paper?
Trustee Danaher?
Mr. Chair, I just feel it's important that we don't know where PFFs, no, what are they called now? PPFs may be coming. There might be some other implications. So we also know that we lost the local priorities. That was dependent upon negotiations, so potentially there may be some additional funds coming. Not holding my breath, though, however, with the current government. But should we do get additional funds, I just think it would be important for us to make sure that we know where it's going and how does it align with what we passed originally, and if it will mean doing more for students.
Any further questions, comments? There being none, would you please cast your ballot? That motion carries. Now you have a second motion, Trustee McDonald?
Do that after the next one.
After the next one? Okay. Is it now time for a break? Pardon? How about 5 to 10? 5 to 10?
10 minutes.
And then do I have to come back and do mine?
Yes.
Thank you.
5 to 10. Thank you. Back on the phone?
You're told one.
Trustee Swan?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Well, I promised you that you would be heard, so now where do you want to go?
Well, I would like to, I think I have to amend. Would like to put forward a motion. And I don't know if it's amendment to the original one.
No, just put forth a motion.
Okay, I would like to propose a motion that the Upper Canada District School Board utilize this year's 2019-20 Learning Opportunity Grant, which is specifically enveloped for library staffing, and also utilize the amount in the deferred revenue account specifically for library staffing in this year's budget.
No, I made that up and like that.
Okay, I think you're clear. Trustee Cram?
I just suggest that in this year's budget be taken out and just expend it. Otherwise, we got to go back into a debate on the budget.
Yes, Director?
Mr. Chair, through you, so when I think about what happens over the ordinary course of an operating year, we would try to maximize the board's resources where that deems fit. It's pretty clear from the conversation this evening that there was an interest or an appetite to use the envelope section of the log grant to devote that towards our LCIs. So with that in mind, and if it would satisfy the board and the trustee, that what we're speaking to is that we would commit those funds that are part of that enveloped log grant that's tagged for library to devote that to our complement of Learning Commons informationalists. If that satisfies both the trustee and the board, then a motion is not required, and we would be prepared as a staff to follow up on that. So that's step one, and I'm just wanting to see if there's a general favor or appetite for that, rather than codifying it in a board motion.
Trustee Swan, does that satisfy you?
As long as I am insured that we are going to use this money and not put it again in deferred revenue, and I'm not quite confident that that might not happen without a motion.
Well, I think...
And I'm scared if we put it in deferred, that the Ford government could take it away from us, any deferred revenue. And I really don't trust this new government, and I want to use the money. We got it, let's use it. It's for library staffing, let's use it.
I think the director's commitment is that it would be used immediately.
So, Mr. Chair, I'm just going to check with Mr. Richard to confirm that there are no restrictions, but if it would please the board and to allay the concerns of the trustee, I'd be prepared to send an email back out to the board to confirm that in fact did take place.
Would you like to?
So I'll turn it over to Mr. Richard to see if there's any restrictions on step one, using what's in 1920 in the log grant that's enveloped for the library area to direct that to 1920 staffing costs around libraries, which for us as a district would be the Learning Commons informationalists.
Mr. Chair, that wouldn't be a problem at all, and it is important to note that that is for the elementary panel. It's based on the elementary schools, so it's for the elementary panel, so that wouldn't be a problem.
Would an email to that effect satisfy you, Trustee Swan?
Yes, and then my secondary question would be, does that mean the board has to increase the budget that we approved to $475,016 versus what we just approved? Because that's the increase of the $275,000.
Mr. Chair, maybe Mr. Richard can comment on that.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I mean, technically you have approved the budget at the 364 million mark plus additional. This is technically an increase to that. And so basically, whether trustees are just consenting to it or you pass an official motion, there should be some indication that you approve of increasing the expenses that come from the 150 and the deferred revenue, if that's your wishes.
So we can do it by consent?
Yes, absolutely. Mr. Chair, you can.
Mr. McDonald?
Only that we just passed a motion that if we get any new money, we would get a report on it.
But this isn't new money. This is money that we've already been granted and money in deferred revenue.
No debate, please, Trustee Swan? Director?
Mr. Chair, to honor the spirit of the last motion that was passed, as the trustee just mentioned a moment ago, for all intents and purposes, that report could be informal, if that would satisfy the board, and if the email would satisfy that.
Mr. McDonald, satisfy your motion?
I want to get out of here before midnight, so.
The answer is yes.
And I just have a secondary question based on new information that just came up from Mr. Richard's comments.
Yes?
He just commented it was for the elementary panel, and that's the first thing I've heard of it, even though I inquired yesterday. So can he please expand on that?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, the technical paper allows for the calculation. It is based on a fixed amount for the board plus $1,728.81 per elementary school. It is clearly for the elementary panel, so that's all. I might not have mentioned that earlier, but it is.
Thank you. Trustee Cram?
Yes, elementary includes 7 and 8.
Mr. Chair, through you, according to the Education Act, it's K-8.
So therefore, it could be in the secondary schools and elementary staffing, correct?
Correct, Mr. Chair.
Is everyone satisfied? Trustee Swan?
As best I can be with the $11 million we lost. So thank you very much for your patience.
You're welcome. Now, Trustee McPherson. I promised you you'd be heard.
You've already shot my idea full of holes before. Because essentially trustee McCrae's motion mirrored mine.
Yeah, but I'm still with the budget I want to deal with. So you're saying you're done?
Well, I think they sent that message to me because trustee McCrae's motion essentially said the same thing that I was going to say.
Right.
Wherein I was asking for rescinding of a motion.
So you're satisfied at least that you've been heard?
I'm satisfied I've been heard. Yes.
Okay, but you're not satisfied.
Well.
But that's too bad because the motion was passed. So, we are now moving to 1507, which is the financial forecast number 3. And I will turn this over to Mr. Richard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will try to be brief, given the late time, and you will have seen some of this information, obviously, in previous. I'm sure you're getting tired of this slide, the Upper Canada financial cycle, but you'll see in June it is the other side of you've done the actual budget, and now we're looking at financial forecast number 3, which is not only the third, but the final forecast for the 18-19 budget. Your next report will be the financial statements, of course, that come in November. If we look at a recap of total pupils of the board, Mr. Chair, you'll see there that the at financial forecast number 2, you were looking at 26,888, and you're now at 26,84840. Not uncommon for the March 31st date. I think every year in my 30 years, we saw a slight decrease in secondary. And you'll see there my reference when I was presenting the proposed budget for 1920, the reference to an actual small increase in elementary for 18-19. We then look at, we just divide the pupils of the board are actually what's used for the analysis for the foundation grants and that, but you do have other purples there. Pupils that are, besides the adult ed and Con Ed and summer school, The 500 quantum there is for international ed and Indigenous students. Mr. Chair, if we look at it at financial forecast number 2, your projected deficit was $3,565,521, which of course you were still non-compliant. Trustees will recall in February you had a meeting where you completely reviewed in-year expenditures again and came up with agreement on a further reduction of $774,000 in-year expenditures, and that has obviously served the board well because you're now looking at your financial forecast number 3, and it is a deficit of $2.736 million. An improvement of $829,000, but even more importantly, made you fully compliant as per Ministry of Education policy. The reasons for the main contributors, of course, was what I just referred to, the post-financial forecast considerations, the $774,000 that you improved. There was also an update of in-year GSN revenues and tuition fees, a drop of $200,000. A projected decrease in school budget spending of $100,000. You'll see there the in-year change deficit before transportation of $700,000, and then an in-year change in surplus related to transportation. They continue to seek efficiencies in there, and you'll see there the total in-year change of a positive $900,000. If we then look at the balanced budget determination, Mr. Chair, in revenues, you'll see up to $371 million. In-year expenses for compliance projected to be $373,917, and the in-year surplus once again of your $2.7 million. Compliance threshold at 1% of operating allocation is $3.3 million, and therefore the board is compliant as the deficit is below the threshold. And obviously confirming once again for the board that administration governance envelope is compliant. And for the accumulated surplus projected for 18-19, you'll see there starting with the 1.7 million deficit, and then your decrease, obviously it's an increase in the deficit. That's your 2.7 plus million, or 2.8 rounded off. Resulting in a forecasted balance as of August 31st of this year of minus 4.5 million. Totally internally appropriated goes up by 100,000, and you end up with the 6.3 million, and that is the 1.8 that you saw in the previous presentation. That matches the 1.8 projected for starting off the year. If we then look at the next one, you have your total, look at the 1.8 there, total externally appropriated, and you recall that had to do with the retirement gratuities, a small amount for future benefits and whatnot, a total of 3.9, and results in total accumulated surplus of 1.2 for the year. You then result in the forecasted balance of 4.6 at the end of the year. Risk and opportunities, Mr. Chair, never changes. WSIB will always be there. You just can't control it. It's uncertain. Some years it's positive, some years it's negative. Continue to monitor, and obviously the board puts into place those things that help to minimize the risk in that area. Actuarial valuations can change depending on interest rates and whatnot, and has an impact on the budget. Interest revenue obviously switches. We know that the government changed their cash flow operations, so that makes it harder for the board to earn interest revenue. And then of course transportation operations, we know all about that and the impact it had on the board, which was totally unforeseen. Mr. Chair, that concludes the presentation, and I'm glad to take any questions you may have.
I know, Trustee McDonald, you have a motion, but are there any questions, comments about the financial forecast number 3? Mr. Richard, thank you, and Ms. Kingston, Mr. Law, thank you very much for all your work on this and the budget. We appreciate your work. So we have a motion pursuant to the financial forecast, and it reads, moved by Trustee McDonald, seconded by
Kramer, Danner, either one.
Trustee Danaher. And it reads as follows. In light of the depletion of Upper Canada District School Board surpluses in relation to the payment of an arbitration ruling for transportation, that the Upper Canada District School Board receive a report no later than the second meeting of September 2019 on a plan to reestablish our surplus to 3% of our annual revenue. Mr. McDonald?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think, and I don't want to harp on the transportation piece, but we did receive an arbitration ruling that we had no control over. But in light of that, we were able to absorb most of it through our accumulated surplus. And I think the plan that we had put in place a number of years ago allowed us to be able to absorb some of that, or most of that, as I said. And I think now that we're at 1.8 million, it's important that we start to reestablish a process to get there again to 3%. We actually never achieved the 3% previously. We were getting there. But the motion is really just to receive information about what it would look like to get to 3%. I'm not locking the board into 3%. I just want to make sure that we have some information that would come back, similar to what we had seen 4 or 5 years ago, I guess, around how we would have put a plan in place to increase the surplus. So just information for us to share and have further discussion in September, Mr. Chair.
Any further discussion? Trustee Barry?
What, through you, Mr. Chair, how many years would you propose it would take to get to this 3%?
It's a good question, and I really don't want to handcuff the board. I think it's important for staff to come in and present that to us based on what we see coming as far as funding. Previously, we were somewhat aggressive, but given the circumstances that we're in, we have some factors that fluctuate in year. So I think we want to make sure that we keep our current spending under control, and if we can slowly start to put funds away. It may take quite a bit longer than than this board itself. So it could be multiple years, multiple boards that would be required to help achieve that 3%. So I'm really just looking to see what it would look like for us to get to 3. And maybe there's a couple of opportunities for us to do it in an aggressive or a moderate type timeline, but one that's not going to impact kids. I think it's important that we budget for it on a regular basis, but I also don't want to see it impact our learning. So I don't want to contribute to a surplus if it means reductions in classroom spending for kids.
Any other questions? If not, trustees, cast your ballot, please. That motion passes. Thank you. I'm moving on to 17.1. Trustees, we have reports from private session of June 5th, June 12th, and tonight. So bear with me. I must read them into the record. Do I just need the motion?
No motion, Mr. Chair. Just one legal matter and 2 personnel matters were discussed. No recommendations were required.
Right here.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's correct.
That is committee of the whole meeting in private session number 1, June 5th, 2019. 1 legal and 2 personnel matters were discussed. No recommendations were brought forward to the board. At its committee of the whole meeting in private session number 2, June 5th, 2019. 1 personnel matter was discussed, and no recommendations were brought forward to the board. At its committee of the whole special meeting in private session number 1, June 12th, 2019, 1 personnel matter was discussed. No recommendations were brought forward to the board. Private session number 2 on the next page. Where are we going now, Lisa? At its committee of the whole special meeting in private session number 2, June 12th, 2019, 1 contractual and 1 personnel matter were discussed. No recommendations were brought forward to the board. At its committee of the whole meeting in private session number 1, June 19th, 2019, one personnel matter, one property, and one contractual matter was discussed, and 4 recommendations were brought forward. And now I need some movers and seconders, please. Trustee Barry, Trustee Pattisier, that the Upper Canada District School Board approve resolution number PS1, 2019, June 19-002, carried in committee of the whole, private session under agenda item D2, June 19th, 2019. Understand that? You can vote in favor now.
Huh?
Thanks.
Can you read the first line again?
It's going to get better.
Almost.
Maybe. Motion number 2. It's moved by Trustee Cram, Trustee Danaher, that the Upper Canada District School Board approve resolution number PS1, 2019, June 19-003, carried in committee of the whole, private session under agenda item D2, June 19, 2019. Please cast your online vote.
Is that 3 or 4?
That was number 2. Having fun yet? And that motion carries. Motion number 3, moved by Trustee Danner and Vice Chair McPherson, that the Upper Canada District School Board approve resolution number PS1, 2019, June 19-004, carried in committee of the whole, private session under agenda item D2, June 19, 2019. Please cast your vote online. And that motion is carried. Motion number 4. It's moved by Trustee Schooler and Trustee McCray. No problem? That the Upper Canada District School Board approve resolution number PS1, 2019, June 19-005, carried in committee of the whole, private session under agenda item D3, June 19, 2019. Please cast your vote online. And that motion's carried. That is committee of the whole meeting in private session number 2, June 19, 2019, 1 legal, 2 contractual, and 2 personnel matters were discussed. That's it. So now we...
Question.
Yes,
We haven't had private session number 2 yet.
not yet. So I'm premature.
Actually,
Will be discussed. I'm sorry, Lisa, you were right.
So we vote on that now?
No. It's future, so we'll vote on it in the future. So 18, 0, 19, 20, information items, I think that's it, isn't it? 21, we move into private session, is that correct?
So we need a 2101, Mr. Chair.
2101, I need a motion to move into private session. Trustee Barry, Trustee Pattisier, the Upper Canada District School Board move into committee of the whole June 19, 2019 at 10:18 p.m. All in favor? Motion's carried. Motion number 2, moved by Trustee Cram and Trustee McDonald, that the committee of the whole move into private session number 2, 2019, June 19, 2019. All in favor? That's carried. So now, we are into private session, and